Welcome to the Conscious Marketing Podcast, where marketers come to look themselves in the mirror and discover how to unlock their superpowers. In this episode, we explore how to use mental technology for self-inquiry and ask ourselves, can we hack our personality? Personality hackers Antonia Dodge and Joel Mark Witt join us to take a look under the hood and decode how our minds operate. Joel Mark Witt is a speaker, writer, and digital media entrepreneur with a focus on personal growth and transformational leadership. As the co-owner and CEO of Personality Hacker, he oversees a new kind of publishing company that merges digital media with emerging models of human development. He focuses on helping people hack their personalities and create more happiness in their lives. Antonia Dodge is an author, thought leader, coach, trainer, systems thinker, and personality profiling expert. Seeing how people tick is at the heart of Antonia's natural ability to understand how people's systems work. At the age of 15, Antonia picked up a book on personality psychology and her world changed forever. She began to see the patterns of why people do what they do, not based on their behavior alone, but based on how the mind works. Together, they run Personality Hacker, and their clients include Zappos, CNN, American Express, and Oracle. You can learn more at personalityhacker.com. Jeff Livingston is the founder of Livingston Campaigns and Livingston Photography. He's a marketing leader, a buzz creator, a published author, and a social fundraiser. As an online marketer and social fundraiser, Jeff has helped brands and nonprofits raise more than $225 million online. He leverages the gig economy to make CMO-level talent and marketing project execution available for companies of all sizes. You can learn more at livingstoncampaigns.com. And that brings us to me. I'm Nicole Kelly, the founder of the Conscious Marketing Institute, a marketing visionary, industry innovator, and quantum healer. I have a track record for creating evolutionary change in the marketing industry. As an early pioneer in social media measurement, I wrote the book, How to Measure Social Media, and created many of the data standards that are still in use today. But then, life took an interesting turn, and after 3 minor strokes and a near-death experience that were caused from over 3 decades on the hamster wheel of success, I founded the Conscious Marketing Institute, where we have a mission to inspire marketers to unlock their superpowers, so together we can help humanity step into its full potential. Learn more at consciousmarketinginstitute.com. Please join Jeff and I in a warm welcome for today's guests, and together, let's create an industry-wide evolution of consciousness. Hi, and welcome to the Conscious Marketing Podcast. Today, we are joined by Antonia and Joel. How are you guys?
Very well.
Fantastic.
I'm really excited about this one because we are such close friends and we've had these conversations. I mean, I think I've known you guys for at least a decade now, and we've had so many of these just really amazing, intellectually stimulating conversations. And I wanted to have you on the show today to specifically talk about mental technology, Myers-Briggs, and ultimately what role personality plays in our self-talk. And I know usually I kind of open the show and go through an overview, but to be honest, like Antonia and Joel are the experts here. So I wanted to open by letting them talk about mental technology, why they like the Myers-Briggs model, and what the CAR model is, which is something that I think is unique to how they apply Myers-Briggs. So Antonia, you want to go over that?
Sure. So personality is one of those things that is, I don't know, almost like a little controversial because a lot of people don't like the idea of being boxed in. They don't like the idea that a personality test can tell them who they are or define their identity or role. At the same time, we can't help but personality type everybody we come across. We do it with sometimes kind of shitty metrics. We do it based on gender or race or socioeconomic level outward markers. And we do that because humans are way too complex to truly understand each other if we don't have some sort of framework in our minds. We have to pattern recognize. We can't help it because just getting to know ourselves is a lifelong process. So to apply that same energy to another person to truly understand who they are would be a Herculean feat. So we have a tendency to create these patterns in our minds or frameworks for how human beings behave and react. And what personality models do is it creates a framework that makes it easier for us to organize our information and vet it through outer world feedback. As in, if a whole bunch of people are talking about a specific framework, then we aren't just vetting it through our own criteria. We actually have other people to bounce ideas off of, and our frameworks become stronger. So the Myers-Briggs personality indicator, or Myers-Briggs, the model itself, it's not necessarily like it's true or accurate or like a fact. It's simply a model or framework for us to help organize pieces of information about what we learn about other people and ourselves, and then to be able to understand ourselves a little quicker, as opposed to having to get to know somebody for, say, a decade and still not quite understand who they are, how they operate. What we do is we figure out certain patterns of how humans behave and then go, okay, I think I understand you a little bit better. And the other piece that it does for us is that it allows us to meet people in their sandbox, as opposed to requiring everybody to meet us in our own sandbox, because we all overvalue our own experience. We all come to the world assuming everybody's seeing everything that we're seeing. And when they don't match up to that, then we think they're either being obnoxious or deliberately obtuse or maybe just stupid. So when we understand how other people are wired, and these mental models or mental technologies are about the wiring of each individual person's mind, when we understand how other people are wired, then as opposed to thinking that somebody's stupid when they don't see what we see, or magic when they see something we don't or we miss, we can understand that everybody's given a different kind of baseline hardware of interaction with the world. When we learn those technologies, when we understand what that mental wiring is, then we can meet them where they're at, as opposed to everybody meeting us where we're at. So mental technologies are simply frameworks. They're just ways of pattern recognizing human behavior and the way that we show up to the world in a way that's a little bit better than our more shallow criteria that we have a tendency to come up with on our own.
One of the things that was really helpful for me, and you've just been so profound in my own journey of really understanding myself and reflecting. And one of the things that really helped me was to understand that, first, as humans, we're organic machines, ultimately. We have this, we think that we're different from robots, but at the end of the day, we have programming and architecture inside of us. And it just so happens that we're sentient. And so we actually make decisions about that hardware and that architecture. And when I think about the human mind and the construct of mental technology, it's really helpful for me to look at the brain as essentially like a central processing unit, and that there are programs running in our brains that determine how we make decisions, how we interpret the internal world, how we interpret the external world. And I think what Myers-Briggs has done for me is it's really helped me understand the software that I was born with, and then given me the opportunity to then go and upgrade that software and or accept it as is. So it's been very, very helpful for me. And my Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENTJ, and I know we've had conversations. We thought I was an ENTP, and then it was like, no, I'm a J, and I've really fully accepted that. And one of the things that for me was especially useful was I kind of fought the ENTJ diagnosis at the beginning because I liked the ENTP better. I liked the worldview of ENTP better. But when I really started to look at what worked for me, and when I was more in flow, and when I felt just like everything was really going my way, and I felt like I had no resistance in my external environment, it was when I structured my life to fit what works for an ENTJ. Things like to-do lists and having a clean house and all of these things were really big indicators for me. And then I noticed that when I fell out of alignment, it was because I hadn't set up those systems for myself. So if my house is messy, it's a really good indication for me of what's happening in my mind now. And I use that essentially to then say, okay, now it's time to self-reflect and look at what's going on. And I just wanted to also just go over one of the things that I think the Myers-Briggs is super interesting, but when I look at how I respond to my external environment, you've described the car model to me. And that car model really has helped me understand, one, where I'm being triggered and responding from a part of myself that's underdeveloped, but it's also been critical in really understanding when that's happening to someone else so that I can have more empathy and compassion for what they're going through. So do you mind going through that model as well?
Sure. Joel's looking at me, so I'll take that one too. So the car model is actually based on the underlying model beneath Myers-Briggs, and where a lot of people are mistaken about what the Myers-Briggs model is. So the 4 letters that you just mentioned, you're an ENTJ, and that just is a 4-letter code. And it has meaning in and of itself. ENTJ would be extrovert, intuitive, thinker, judger.
Most people stop there. That's really it.
Right.
Most people know their code and they, okay, these are the traits of my personality, and then that's it.
Right, and then there's encapsulated avatars or profiles written about each of these 16 Myers-Briggs types. But that's actually just the tip of the iceberg. The work that Isabel Briggs-Myers and Catherine Briggs worked on was actually built on Jungian cognitive functions. Cognitive functions are, the easiest way to understand them is that it's mental wiring. Different ways of engaging with the world through either decision-making or through perception. And they're different styles of, like you mentioned, almost like hardwired into our mind to look at different things and understand how we value things differently and what catches our attention differently. And so there's 8 cognitive functions in total. And they all have an either introverted or internally focused, what's called attitude, or an externally wired attitude. And everybody has access to all 8 of them. But the ones that we prefer are the ones that make up our personality type. These cognitive functions also has either a perceiving assignation or information gathering way of experiencing the world, or a decision-making or judging way or assignation. And basically that means that the information we take in, we also have to determine the value of that information. So we're wired, each person is wired a little differently on how they're naturally going to evaluate the world. So some people might evaluate it based on outcome. Other people might evaluate information based on the purity of the data and how accurate it is. Some people make decisions based on how much it strikes them as an individual and how authentic it is to them. And other people do it based on whether or not it's going to help all of us get along. So there's different styles of decision-making or judging the value and worth of the information we take in. And all of us favor 2 of these cognitive functions the most. We favor a specific way of taking in information, and we favor a specific way of determining the worth or value of that information. And that's actually understanding those 2 cognitive functions or mental wiring. That's actually the foundation of Myers-Briggs. So when you see that 4-letter code and you go, oh, I'm an ENTP, and then you look up all this information online about, and I'm an ENTP, which is why I threw that one out. You look up all this information online about, what that means and what are the characteristics and how do they show up, and then none of them quite suit you. Like there's always like, well, kinda, yeah. I mean, like I kind of identify with that, but then this one description will talk about how ENTPs are all like Doc Brown, and it's like, kind of, not really. Or you might be a different Myers-Briggs personality type and you look up a description and it's like, yeah, I mean, I identify with that to some extent. Well, that's because those profiles or descriptions are intending to encapsulate all the different varieties or ways that a person could be using those cognitive functions or that mental wiring. So an example of that is, say we, each different personality type has a different operating system. Let's look at it that way. So I'm going to have the same operating system as another ENTP, but different pieces of software or apps could be downloaded on that operating system. And that's going to make it look wildly different. Like I could be using the same operating system as another person, but all of the things that are downloaded onto my operating system are completely different based on individual interest or the influences of my life. So you could look at those 2, maybe laptops or whatever and go, these aren't the same at all. And that's because I have a different backdrop on mine and I have all these different software programs, but it's actually the operating system underneath that's the same. So when you look at a description of your type, they're trying to get to the operating system while still describing all the apps. And that's where the discrepancies show up. That's why Myers-Briggs has a tendency to confuse people, or people think that it's not accurate. And what cognitive functions do is they get to the operating system level and they start to describe how those mental processes work and then go, well, and it's individualized to you, which is how there could be 7 billion people in 16 types. And so the CAR model is a way to illustrate those cognitive functions. So your favorite of the 8 is, we put it in, basically the CAR model looks like a driver, a co-pilot. Behind the co-pilot is a 10-year-old and behind the driver is a 3-year-old. And your favorite mental process or cognitive function sits in the driver's seat. Knowing your driver cognitive function is incredibly important because that's what puts you in flow. When people are introverts, but they identify as being extroverts or vice versa, it's because whatever that mental process is, it has a very specific way of showing up with either extroversion and introversion. It's not always the same. So an introvert could be an introvert and really enjoy hanging out with people and talking with people. And that looks very different than an introvert that needs a lot more alone time in order to process. And so the person who's an introvert might not identify as an introvert because compared to somebody else using a different introverted process, they seem more extroverted. So they'll push themselves to an extroverted place. And yet their best work happens alone. They still need that alone time. So it's those kinds of nuances that are really important in understanding these cognitive functions because it gives you more nuance and flavor on your relationship with your mental wiring. So that driver process is super important because that's what puts you in flow. And then it gives you kind of an idea of what are the things you need to do to stay in flow and get energy and feel good about yourself. And then next to the driver is a co-pilot, and that's like your navigator. It's the person who's reading the map. It's the other adult in the car. And that is going to be whatever process you are naturally talented at, but have a tendency to not want to build skill in. And the reason why is your co-pilot will always be the what's called attitudinal opposite of your driver. So if your driver's extroverted, your co-pilot is introverted. And if your driver's introverted, your co-pilot is extroverted. Well, we all favor the world that we're most comfortable in. So we have a tendency to kind of neglect the co-pilot a little bit, even though it's our navigation system. So one of the most powerful elements of understanding that piece of the car model is to know what's the biggest bang for your developmental buck. If you focus on developing the co-pilot process, you actually become a lot more balanced as a person. And so just knowing that about your personality type is really important. If you are into the technical aspect of Myers-Briggs, the technical names for these are the dominant and auxiliary process or cognitive function. But we put it in car because it's a little easier to understand a driver and a navigator. Behind the co-pilot sits a 10-year-old, and this is a less sophisticated but oftentimes insightful part of who you are. The reason why it's at a 10-year-old level is because it's the exact opposite of the co-pilot. So you're going to spend more time in the co-pilot usually, and it's a natural talent for you. And 10-year-old is a place you're going to go to at times, but it's not going to be as sophisticated. And we have a tendency to go to the 10-year-old process when we're defensive. So it's important to know what the 10-year-old process is because that's your defense strategy. Anytime the universe is trying to give you a piece of information that you don't want to hear, you're going to go to the 10-year-old to soothe yourself and to not try not to hear that information. But at the same time, it's also a very joyful, playful part of your personality. So understanding what it is to go there in a place or a time period of play as opposed to a time of defense is really important. And then behind the driver, it's a 3-year-old, and it's the exact opposite of the driver, and that's why it's only got the sophistication of a 3-year-old. And knowing what your 3-year-old mental process is helpful because that's your blind spot. It's the part of you that you tend to resist, neglect. It's also the part of you that you go to when you're throwing your temper tantrums. So understanding the 3-year-old process is important for recognizing your temper tantrum-like behaviors. The places when you're in the grip of something that feels like not you. That's usually your 3-year-old process. And recognizing a good relationship with it, figuring out how to use it in more healthy ways as opposed to as a blind spot is really good information too. So that's like a meta perspective on something. I'm not plugging any specifics into there because again, there's 8 different cognitive functions that can be applied in that car model in all sorts of different configurations. And that's what gives us 16 personality types is what are the players in your car. So those 4 letters, like ENTJ, ENFP, ENTP, or whatever it is, that was actually originally a decoder ring to tell you what your cognitive functions were. But that's a little bit more complicated than most people want to dig into a model. So they just see those 4 letters and they see a shallow description and they go, oh, that's all bullshit. To some extent, they're right. That is all bullshit, right? Nobody can be encapsulated. 7 billion people can't be encapsulated in 16 different profiles. It's just impossible. But when you go to the operating system and go, oh, you're running this operating system, he's running this operating system, and she's running that operating system, that makes it a little easier because we all understand that even though we're running different operating systems or the same operating systems, we can apply individuality with the software and the apps that we place on top of it. So was that a clear enough
I think it was fantastic. Like usually it takes us like 40 minutes to describe, and like you did a great job, I think.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I thought it was great.
I thought it was great too.
Thank you, Nicole and Jeff. You guys weigh in.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's excellent. And Jeff, I'm curious about your perspective because I have so much experience being such close friends with them. Like hearing all of that, like, and when I asked you, I was like, what's your Myers-Briggs? And you're like, I don't know. I don't like labels. Like when you hear the background and how it's being applied in this way, you know, what are your thoughts on mental technology and how it can be used?
Well, I like the analogy of the operating system and being able to boot different things on it, because my experience has been that when I want to change something and I choose to learn how to do that, then I can change something. And when I want to learn a new skill, I learn it. But when I don't, I won't. And that includes behavior patterns. So, I mean, I know that, for me, my experience with these tests tend to be from HR people trying to slam you into a box and make you fit into their puzzle. And if you don't fit into their puzzle, they just disqualify you. And I just think that that's just general human behavior, is to label you and slam you into a box. And I find that to be prohibitive and probably counterproductive in the long term. But the sense that if we treat it more like an operating system, I like that. Because that's my experience. Like, they tell you can't become good at things once you hit a certain age. And I think that's bullshit. Excuse my language. Like, everybody tells me I'm such a great photographer. I'm a better photographer than I'm a writer. And you know what? I really didn't even pick up a camera until 2008. And I was 36 years old, and I would tell you I didn't even become good until I was 42 when I decided that my photography sucked and I needed to learn how to edit, and then I forced myself to do it, even though I had resisted it. And once I went in, I made that decision. To me, it's about commitment, compassion for something, or passion for something, if you would, and a desire to really get into a behavior or a skill set. And, to say that you can't do something because of what your Myers-Briggs test is just something I've heard, and it's something I refuse to accept.
Yeah. I think a really good model will always be facilitating, not limiting.
Yeah.
And if a model is imposing limitations, or even just a person's understanding of a model is imposing limitations, then it's not the right model for them. And that's the nice thing about mental technologies and models is, or at least in my opinion, even as somebody whose bread and butter is doing this all the time, it's supposed to serve us. We don't serve it. And so in like an HR department context where somebody's enforcing labels, that means that they're trying to make people serve the model. And that's why it turns into a limitation. But if the model is serving us and we understand it with a little bit more, it gives us an empowered frame, helps us understand why we behave the way we do, and helps us communicate better with other people, then it's a good model and it should be applied. And if it's starting to limit, then in my opinion, you throw the model out and go find one that's better suited to you.
So I know you guys work with different companies, and Zappos is one of your clients who's very well known for their culture. And I'm just curious in hearing this, and it's true that in most companies, our first interactions with the Myers-Briggs model is because of an HR department or some personal development that is happening as part of a team retreat or team development. And it seems to me that Zappos has done a really good job of being able to leverage this kind of technology, not to limit, but to actually expand and create really effective teams. What do you recommend for companies who want to create systems for people to be able to self-inquire so that the team is more effective, but not put their people into a box?
I think so from my standpoint, one of the biggest things that you give somebody when you go through this at a company is you give them language to interface with each other and to recognize, because again, it's not necessarily the behavior that we look at behavior, obviously that's a marker of it, but we're trying to get down to the wiring of the mind. How is someone learning information? How is someone making decisions? If you're on a team, you're a team lead, or you're on a team working with a bunch of coworkers, and you know how your coworkers are seeing the world, the lens they're seeing the world through, it can really help you when you're in brainstorming sessions or in team meetings and things, when you're trying to get, things accomplished. Like, how are you not seeing what I'm seeing? And it's like, oh, I have language. This is how you're seeing what I'm seeing right now, right? It's like this language you have, the ability for you to understand, oh, you're seeing this more in an abstract way because that's how you're wired. I'm looking at the concrete details. You're looking at the abstract. You're not trying to be obtuse. You're not trying to, stop me from getting something done. You're just trying to open the frame more and see something abstract, coworker of mine or team lead or whatever, whatever the configuration is. So it's just I think the biggest thing it gives teams is the ability to look at the other people on the team that are playing alongside you to do some big stuff in the world. And you can basically go, I see how you're wired, and you can give somebody grace, and you can see how you're wired. You can see why you're responding the way you're responding too, right? Right. So this is really powerful stuff on that front.
Yeah. Can I piggyback on that?
Yeah, please.
So there's a tendency for people to use things like Myers-Briggs or other instruments like StrengthsFinder or Colby or Enneagram or anything else.
DISC or Big Five.
DISC, Big Five. Yeah, those are the more popular ones in the world of psychology. There's a tendency to want to be able to find the magic pill for hiring. And so they'll apply personality tests as a way to find the right candidates. And the challenge is that personality will not tell you a person's skill level, their experience, their drive,
their values.
Their individual values. It won't tell you any of that information. So to use it as a hiring tool, a person should be very, very, very cautious unless they themselves have and kind of escalated amount of proficiency with the model. Like they should be an expert. And when I say things like cognitive functions, they should be way ahead of me if they're going to use it for hiring. Otherwise, it's quite unfair because it can't tell you a lot of the pieces of information you need. But in the hiring process, it will tell you one thing, and that is we have a tendency, again, we overvalue our own experience, and we have a tendency to like people who are like us. You know, like we just talked to somebody who's really similar to us, and we're like, I just like the cut of that person's jib. I don't know what it is. There's just something about that. And so we unintentionally and unconsciously tend to hire ourselves over and over and over in teams. And one of the things that understanding an instrument like this will do is it will catch the tendency to hire yourself or replicas of yourself over and over again, and then suddenly have like all these sort of blind spots in your team. One of the things we noticed when we worked with Zappos Insights a long time ago was that at the time, the person who was hiring themselves a lot. And their particular mental process or their cognitive function that they favored is a process that's technically called extroverted feeling. And extroverted feeling is all about harmony and connection and making sure like the morale is high. And so anybody who came in that was cheerful.
Zappos does well, right?
That's what they're all known for, right?
Yeah.
And so, and Insights is like a child company of Zappos to teach other companies how to create replicate the way of creating culture in their own businesses. And so in this small team, you had like an overrepresentation of the cognitive function of extroverted feeling. And we nickname it harmony. So I'll just call it harmony. There was an overrepresentation of harmony. Well, that's fine in keeping morale up and having good culture. But the challenge is that they were attracting C-levels from other companies to come into boot camps to teach them how to replicate this process. And most of the C-levels that were coming in were not people who use extroverted feeling. They're people who use a process called extroverted thinking, or what we call effectiveness, which is about metrics, bottom line, pass, fail. How do I know the numbers play out?
Which is what you would use, Nicole, as your primary way of seeing, going through the world, right?
So effectiveness people who were their target avatar were flying in from all over the world to do these boot camps, being taught by people who were about harmony. And I watched it happen a couple times where at the end of a presentation, the effectiveness people were like, okay, let's get to bottom line, whether metrics or the numbers, how do you quantify all this? And the harmony people who were like, well, we haven't really worked out the numbers. It's more that everybody's happy, right? And everybody's having a good time. And look, and there was an intuitive understanding with harmony people that if everybody's got high morale, then they'll all be doing better in their jobs. And the effectiveness people were like, yeah, that's not that intuitive. I'm going to have to see the hard data. And so this moment of awkwardness that kept coming up over and over until we said, you don't have a single effectiveness person on your team. Not one. In a team of like a dozen people, it was actually a baker's dozen, not a single effectiveness person was on the team. So nobody's working on the metrics. And every time the question came up, well, it didn't kill them. They were okay because Zappos in itself spoke like to these C-level people. So they were like, okay, I will kind of give you some wiggle room. But I was like, if you get an effectiveness person on there, and they work out the ROI and the metrics, you're going to have a much more compelling case. Yeah. And it was just something they didn't even know to look for. So in hiring, one of the things that these kinds of personality tests can do is not necessarily get a specific person on the team, but to see if your team has a blind spot. What's that blind spot? What is being overrepresented and what's being underrepresented? And then those kinds of things will shine a light in a dark place on your team.
I love that perspective because I've used this myself and just looking at who I work with. Like I know some of my own blind spots, right? Like I am the effectiveness person, but I am not like accuracy is a blind spot, not necessarily a blind spot. It's just not a decision-making function for me. So I will forego the accuracy if it's not perfect and be like, it's close enough. But to somebody who's like an accuracy person, like our friend Jessie Newburn, who I love and work with often, the reason I work with her is because she brings that to the table and will show me, well, we actually need to balance this out with a little bit more detail so that your accuracy people will be able to understand it and will stand behind it. And so as we look at communicating information, I think all of this, the harmony people, the effectiveness people, and I assume there are many others. When you really understand that, not only within your own team, you can also start to look within your own family, and you can say, why am I arguing with my spouse? Well, maybe we're looking at this through a different lens, and he needs something different than what I need. And I know in my own personal relationship, my partner is a feeler and I'm a thinker. So those two things, he's very sensitive to emotions and very sensitive to how I make him feel, or how he perceives I make him feel. And I'm very much like, how do we get to the end of this? Like, what's the fastest way to the end of this conversation? And being able to have that lens and to understand like, oh, okay, well, this piece is really important to him, or this piece is really important to this person. I can then it's not that I change what I'm saying, but I can be cognizant of it in a way that ensures everyone's needs are met. And we can create, I think harmony becomes for me a natural byproduct of having that lens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The Conscious Marketing Podcast is sponsored by the Conscious Marketing Institute. Learn more at consciousmarketinginstitute.com. Are you ready to go further? Check out the latest free masterclasses and upcoming courses. Learn more at consciousmarketinginstitute.com. Am I striking a chord for you today? You can hire me too. Learn how at consciousmarketinginstitute.com. Just click on services. And now let's get back to the show. It's not that I change what I'm saying, but I can be cognizant of it in a way that ensures everyone's needs are met. And we can create, I think harmony becomes for me a natural byproduct of having that lens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We also recently, is it okay if I give some context? A person watching might want to know what those 8 functions are to try to self-identify. Is it okay if I, okay.
Yeah.
So the 4 decision-making or evaluative criteria, like the should statements in our head that we just unconsciously have with us all the time, like the world should be a certain way. The 4 different styles, we've already talked about effectiveness, which is bottom line, pass, fail. I want the metrics and the numbers. The second one we already talked about was harmony. Extraverted feeling, which is about morale and connection and making sure that people are honoring each other, connecting. The third one, you just mentioned accuracy. Its technical name is Introverted Thinking, and it's about the purity of information. So that's a little different than an outcome. It's about wanting to get as pure information as possible. Think of it kind of loosely like math or the scientific
It's more
method.
Process focused than result focused.
Exactly. And the final one, and this is what your partner has, Nicole, is introverted feeling, or what we call authenticity. And authenticity, if I'm not mistaken. And authenticity is about what feels right to me. So it's more about how the individual is impacted by choices, and it tends to be more about ethics and conscience. So those are the 4 decision-making criteria. And all of us favor one of those 4 as our primary way of making decisions. And you can usually find yourself in there. And like I said, we have access to all of them. So there's going to be a moment, if you're an authenticity person, there's going to be a moment of bottom line for you. And there's going to be a moment of pure data. And there's going to be a moment of getting everybody's needs met. But for the most part, you're going to favor what feels right and authentic to you as a person. And so all of us have access, but we choose one that is our go-to. And then the 4, what's technically called perceiving processes or information gathering processes. One of them is called Introverted Sensing. We've named it memory. It's about a past orientation and understanding who we are based on our past. So it's about picking up information as we go and consulting experts and making sure or keeping precedent going. It's not evaluating things or judging them. It's just an attempt to manage things. And so people who use that have a tendency to reflect backward when they're learning. There's another one called Extroverted Sensing, or what we call sensation, which is that in the moment, picking up a bunch of information in order to make quick decisions based on it. This is the favored one of a lot of athletes and people who need fast information. And then another one is Introverted Intuition, which we call perspectives, and that is more pattern recognizing into the future. So it's future pacing and seeing way down the line. And it's also jumping into other people's perspectives to try to learn information by trying to figure out how other people are seeing it beyond just how they're seeing it. And the final one is Extroverted Intuition, or what we call exploration, which is pattern recognizing the world through gathered experiences. So it's button mashing and throwing spaghetti against the wall and brainstorming in order to come up with new connections. And its focus is on novelty. So you have one of the 4 judging or decision-making as your favorite, and then it pairs naturally with one of the 4 information gathering. And then when you discover which one of those two is your favorite from each category, that's what defines your personality type. And that's your operating system. So you can write any app or software on top of that operating system, but that's your fundamental way of engaging with the world. And that's your fundamental way of making decisions on the information you gathered.
Is it fair to say that once you figure out your driver and your co-pilot, that like which one is the one that is most beneficial for someone to really expand into, to really grow and kind of get the best of all worlds of what their operating system is?
Well, like Antonia said a little earlier, the tendency for us, so we have our driver, that primary cognitive function, primary way of going through the world, is going to have an attitude attached to it, an extroverted or introverted attitude. And the co-pilot, or the auxiliary, what's technically called the auxiliary function, is going to have the opposite attitude. So if, again, like for me as an ENFP, my driver is extroverted. I'm an extrovert, so I have extroverted intuition as my driver. And that means my co-pilot's going to be introverted, introverted feeling. And everybody, it's our belief here at Personality Hacker that everybody will benefit from growing that co-pilot more than anything else to start with. So what I mean by that is our tendency is, again, like Antonia mentioned, to skip past that, stay in the attitude that we're comfortable with, because that 10-year-old that she talked about that sits in the backseat of our car, that's the same attitude as our driver. So it's very comfortable for us to be in that world. That's why we tend to go there when we're defensive or when we're trying to keep things at arm's length, or we're trying to figure something out. Like we can skip to that and utilize that instead of growing our co-pilot. We still have access to our co-pilot. We still use it a lot, but sometimes it can feel like, it's a lot of hard work to go there and put intention to it, put discipline to it, to grow it and to focus on it. So in principle, we found that most people get benefit by going to that co-pilot and focusing on growing it, focusing on exercising it, and taking the raw talent that sits there and developing skill around it. So for example, for me in my own personal life, I've spent a lot of time in the last 6-7 years focusing on introverted feeling. How do I subjectively feel about things? Because it was so easy for me to skip past that and go to what's my 10-year-old, which is effectiveness, try to get to the bottom line. When I'm faced with a problem, I'm looking, how do I get this handled as fast, as fast as possible? But it's like the development of a 10-year-old, right, in my personality. So it's not going to be very sophisticated like with you, Nicole. You do this very well because this is what you lead with, but it's not my primary. So I'm like kind of struggling along a lot. But now that I've been working on getting into that introverted feeling, what resonates with me at core level? What makes a deep, authentic connection to me? What are my core values? What are my true core values? What's my motivation? How do I show up to the world? And how am I reading other people's motivations? If I'm playing in that world, I all of a sudden start to have superpowers I didn't know I had, right? Like they start to come out. I'm developing skill around that. And I'm showing up as a much better person, a much better leader, a much better marketer, all these things that are coming from growing that. So in principle, that's what we really direct people to first, to spend time there. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, beautifully. Because I know for myself, and I did this intuitively. At the time, like I didn't realize I was doing it, but basically, when I kind of had this life experience and life event that kind of shook up my whole world, I found myself like really reflecting and looking within and starting to ask questions about how I felt, because what I had realized is that for a variety of reasons, but mostly because of childhood trauma, I had really shut off my feeling part entirely. My whole emotional body was completely shut down. And I really didn't experience emotions. I remember saying to someone at a conference one time, I was like, sometimes like, I wonder if I'm like a little bit of a sociopath, because I don't feel emotion. I don't feel guilt. I don't feel these bad things that people tell me about. I don't feel anything. I just feel numb to everything. And so as I was like facing my mortality, you're kind of looking at it and going, well, maybe I should have some feelings about that.
Right.
And I started really focusing on how I felt, and it totally transformed my entire life. I also started taking more time alone, and I really exercised my introverted muscles for probably like 2 years.
Yeah.
I really I didn't interact with people for a while. I really looked within, and I realized that I could get just as much energy from being alone as I could from engaging with a group. And the funny thing is that now, and I've asked you guys, can you switch extroverted and introverted? Because now, I'm after I've been with people for a long time, I kind of fall into that extroverted introvert where it's like, okay, there's an end to it. I need my personal time.
Totally.
I was going to say, it's interesting, I think, from my perspective, when I'm listening to the conversation, I think that this is useful to help navigate situations, not for you, but when you're dealing with other people. Like, for example, that results-only oriented person, and when you see them just leaning into that personality, sometimes their strengths become weaknesses. You know what I mean? When we just over-rely on them and don't compensate with that co-pilot, as you had said. So do you teach folks how to use these skills or the ability to recognize these different operating systems, if you would, or skill types, and how to better manage within an organization or within an enterprise or even a team?
We look at it more holistically than just for enterprises or teams. So we do have, like our flagship training, for example, it's called Profiler Training. And what we do in that course, it's like a 4-month course, the 5-day intensive live event. It basically teaches people to do what we do, which is to sit down with someone in a formal, it could be a formal or informal conversation, but basically have a conversation with them, determine how their wiring is, and then help guide them in maybe personal growth goals or just to understand themselves better, get a more nuanced thing. And a lot of people that have gone through that training have applied it. Like we have multiple business owners that go through and they use it in their organizations, because once they have a sense of how people are wired, it has helped them. Well, actually, what's funny is one of our students that came through like 4 or 5 years ago, his name's Ivan. He did it for his business. He inherited this business from his father, and he and his father were having dynamic issues, and also the business was having some issues. He wanted to learn more about how to implement this in his business. And what ended up happening was he did in the business, but also he said the side benefit was I went home and now I'm interfacing with my son differently and my wife differently. And it like really impacted a lot of areas of his life. He's also an ENTJ. And it was very profound for him, because it's not just the application is not just business. It's really any area of your life that you touch, around you. It can be impactful there. All the people in your life, whether it's personal, friends, family, business, associates, marketing. I mean, we can talk about marketing here a little bit about how it can be powerful for that too. There's so much use here. So we don't necessarily go in with the framework like the application is not always business. It's more about here, understand this and apply it to whatever you're interested in, which is business often. That makes sense.
Right.
We do have a couple of business-oriented programs in
Yeah.
our catalog. However, we feel that the area of things like personality type and personality models, the area that was audiences were just yearning for, but weren't quite getting because these models and systems are so often applied to business worlds, is people knew that there was something powerful for their own personal development. So that's actually the area we decided to focus on.
Right.
And the challenge, I think another reason why some of these models can turn people off is that the challenge is that the first step is to figure out your type and then kind of figure out your operating system or your own wiring. And then people get stuck there in self-affirmation. Like they over-rely on the model. They get super dependent on it. They start to define their limitations. They start to tell other people what they can't do and what they should. Like they kind of turn it into a way to be a bully in some ways.
Right.
Because at the first level, it really, the model is powerful for self-acceptance, really.
Right.
Self-acceptance is the first level, which is like, oh, so much makes sense. Oh my gosh, now I understand why I was doing all that stuff. Oh my God, like that just makes so much sense. And there's a hit to that. There's a hit to that feeling that people kind of get addicted to. And so then they just keep wanting to learn more and more and more and more about all of these different models so they can get that hit of self-acceptance. And that's an important level to go to. Self-acceptance is super, super valuable. And these models facilitating that, I think, is one of the biggest things that they bring. But to get stuck there is it's a little masturbatory,
Right.
and it can actually turn into its own challenge. And the second level is then to give other people acceptance. That's the next natural piece. And so to just learn about it for your own self-acceptance turns masturbatory. But if you do it to understand where other people are coming from, then now you've elevated the model to something more useful. But the final piece is to now use it to grow, to not limit yourself in a definition, but actually to facilitate your own growth and to become a better version of yourself. That's actually where things can go. And once you hit that level, because we're talking about yourself, from which your entire life, like manifests outside of, then it does hit every single area of your life. And you make better business decisions You make better relationship decisions. You make better life decisions because you're now understanding sort of the ergonomics of how your world can interplay with your natural wiring, and you don't try to fit yourself into a mold that's not natural to you. You don't try to become a bully and force everybody else to see your perspective and it's got to be your way. You have a better sort of synergy with everything around you. And I think in a business application, and that's one of the reasons why we have a couple of business programs in our suite, because there is so much application here by creating an environment that's sort of ergonomic to everybody's personality, including those of you, like your avatar, like the person you're trying to communicate with. What are their values? What is their wiring?
Yeah.
Are you talking to them in a way that makes sense to them? Are you trying to accommodate everybody's different style? And they probably, like, not everybody's going to seek you. You're going to speak to a certain avatar. And so what's that avatar's wiring? Can you say it in a way that's very clear for them? So a couple ways that this works is not just in team building, but also in, when you build an avatar, you're supposed to get all sorts of demographic information.
You know what she means, which is avatar, right? Customer avatar.
Customer avatar, my apology.
We'll make sure that everybody
Right.
that's watching too can
Right.
make sure that
Like your target audience, really,
Yeah,
that one person who's representing your entire life.
Profile, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at that, you're supposed to get all sorts of demographic information. Like, you're even supposed to name them, right? This is Sally, and Sally's 45, and they're, this socioeconomic level, and this is their life, this is their life. And you create this really fleshed out description of a human being without adding in their own personal motivations or how they're evaluating things, or what are the words that are really going to speak to them? How do you meet them where they're at cognitively? And so one of the nice things about understanding these models is that you can get super clear on who that person is, not just in their outer world circumstances, but also what their operating system is. What is really, like, speaking to them? What is something that means something to them? How are they going to want to consume your content? And then how are they going to need to hear it in order to evaluate whether or not it's the right fit for them? Right. So those are the kinds of ways that it can be really powerful in a business application. But as Joel mentioned, we like to focus on the growth application too. So you can apply the model to your business and say, where's my business? Like, almost personality type your business and ask, where's my business stagnant? Like, is it just in a self-accepting mode? Is it constantly saying, no, we're an amazing business and we don't have any blind spots and we're awesome? Or what's the growth path for your business, right? If your business had a personality type, what's the next level for it? How can you grow it and turn it into the best version of itself? What is it? So there's a lot of different ways that this can be applied that really moves the needle for a business and marketing and that sort of thing, because you just see sort of all of this as a macro version of the individual experience of growth, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think that's, like, now you're speaking my language. And I think
Just on board now.
No, that's really, I think that's very powerful. And I think that's, there's the value in it to me, because, again, when I hear, and maybe this is my personality type, but as soon as you tell me I fit in a box, I want to break it. I'm like, okay. Yeah.
Are you loving what Jeff is laying down? You should hire him. Learn more at livingstoncampaigns.com.
I really like seeing something happen that impacts people. There's nothing quite like building a product or a service or helping a cause where you get to see the customer or the end user really feel awesome or smile because this changed the way they think about the world. When you do something like that, that has lasting impact. And there's only 3 types of campaigns you can buy: fundraising, product launch, or some major corporate initiative.
Learn more at livingstoncampaigns.com. And now let's get back to the show.
Because, again, when I hear, and maybe this is my personality type, but as soon as you tell me I fit in a box, I want to break it. I'm like, okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
There is a personality, several personality types that feel that way. So it's totally normal, Jeff. We'll let you on the hook.
Oh, my partner is one of them. So he is the same way in that he's like, no, you're not going to give me a label. And it's true that, we had this conversation with Tamsin last week where we talked about, the limitations of labels and how when we take a label and we prescribe it to ourselves, then we essentially continue to recreate that label in our lives. And we're living this very limited experience when we're all multidimensional beings. And so, but using it as a growth opportunity for yourself, using it as a growth opportunity for your company, for me, that's where I found the most power, as well as in personal relationships. But I really want to dig into the marketing side of this now that we have the framework of what we're talking about and everyone kind of understands why we're talking about it. Joel, you came from the marketing industry, longtime friend. You actually were one of the first people who published some of my content on folk media when you were running it. And of course, that content was on return on investment as an ENTJ. I was perfectly aligned with my flow state. So tell me about like looking at marketing. We talked about the customer avatar piece. The thing that I noticed that marketers do is that when we're developing these customer avatars, they're either entirely too limiting or they're entirely too broad. So how can you really look at who your audience actually is? And then the second piece of this is that when you're looking at marketers who are designed to serve the audience, what I find is that so many times the marketing team isn't the audience that they are designed to serve, and they have a huge blind spot as to what that audience actually wants from them. Is it best to hire marketers who fit that customer avatar?
That's an interesting question. So let's start with the speaking to people where they're at. I think we've been talking a lot about the high level abstract so far, right? We've been talking about, once you know somebody and how they're wired, and once you kind of have a sense of this, you can speak to them in their language. Well, what is that language? Like, what is the tangible? What are we actually talking about here? Let's zoom down into more tangibility if we can go there. And let's just take, Antonia talked about there are 4 ways of learning information or perceiving cognitive functions. And there's 4 ways of judging or evaluating criteria, making decisions. When we're in a marketing framework, obviously we want to speak to people in whatever way they're perceiving information or opening their frame. But let's just put that to a side for this conversation because we don't have a ton of time to go through all of it. Let's talk about those 4 decision-making functions that Antonia has outlined already, right? Effectiveness, authenticity, accuracy, and harmony. And this, from a marketing standpoint, as far as speaking to people, this is where I think a lot of effort can be put into, because when you are in a marketing or sales place, you're trying to get people to make a decision. You're trying to get them to evaluate something they heard and either click on the link or sign up for the newsletter or put their credit card number in or whatever it is. You're trying to motivate them to do something, right? And you're going to motivate people however they're wired in one of those 4 decision-making functions a little bit differently with the literal language you will use in like sales copy or something on a presentation or whatever. You're going to literally speak differently depending on who you're talking to. Now, we have the advantage here because we're a personality type company. We know segments of our list, like our marketing list, and some of the people that come through, not everybody, but if they're in our database, they've taken a test to get into our database. So we're pretty sure of what their personality type is based on the test they took. So when we speak to people, if we wanted to, we don't do this right now because we just speak to everybody in...
Why not? Oh my God.
We don't do this right now, but we could get down to the nuance of speaking specific phrasing and language to people based on how their mind is wired to get decisions. And this is another reason why I think people should know personality types, is so they can watch marketers doing this to them. So they're not manipulated. They're not sitting ducks being hacked, right?
Well, and that's, just to make a little note, one of the reasons why we don't do this, and we're hesitant to, and we also try to follow the don't be evil model in all of this, is that arguably the recent campaign election, these are the kinds of tactics that were employed in order to sway, and they're swaying elections now.
Cambridge Analytica in Europe.
Absolutely. So the idea that this isn't powerful stuff is actually creating a blind spot to how much power other people are able to employ on you having this information. And so we try not to be evil. We try not to be manipulative in this way, but at the same time, we try to meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
And so there's like a fine line here. The fine line is honoring other people and meeting them where they're at. And then the going over that line is the now being deliberately manipulative and trying to just hack people for your own ends. And so even in marketing, and you guys are doing conscious marketing, in marketing, you have to be very aware of that there's actually legit power here to kind of hijack people's thoughts.
Yeah.
And so using these kinds of tools needs to be done with a certain amount of integrity as well. And I think that's the important piece, is that it's powerful. It's being used on you right now. You should probably know how it's being used on you. You should probably be aware of it. And then if you choose to also employ this kind of content and information, try to do it with some conscience and integrity associated with it.
Yeah. So what I'm going to tell you right now, if you're watching or listening, you better not use this for evil. I will hunt you down.
Yeah.
No, I probably will hunt you down. I don't know. But just be careful, because this stuff is powerful. And hopefully, I think that your audience, guys, you're attracting people that are decent human beings that are going to be careful with this type of stuff that they do. So that's my hope.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think people that don't listen to this podcast that are the issue.
There you go. See? So listen to conscious marketing. So basically, let me just give you kind of just a tangible. It's not comprehensive. It's not going to be the end all be all of the language you use, but just a couple ways of thinking about some of these. So you can have some tangible takeaways from today's conversation. So if you're talking to an effectiveness person, let's say you are running a company and you're marketing to mostly effectiveness people. Let's say these are people that are bottom line thinkers. They're looking for metrics and numbers. Again, they're not really concerned too much about the purity of the data they're looking at, right? They want to know, I don't care if the data is pure. Does it work? Does it get me results? And so in marketing, you can literally say, this works. Bottom line, this is the outcome. Words like outcome, bottom line, results, metrics, accomplishments, things, checking things off. These are the types of language you can use to articulate to an effectiveness person about your product or service, right? This is going to decrease this is going to increase your retention rate by 10%. Those kind of languaging patterns, or
words like effective and efficient.
This is efficient for
putting
your business.
Things out in bullets.
Yeah, this is
honoring time. It's a system,
that works every time. It's replicatable.
Sustainable.
It's a blueprint. You hear these marketing.
Scalable.
Yeah, blueprints.
I feel like I'm on a bad online conversation, man. I'm like, da-da-da-da. I'm on the HubSpot blog.
And so that's going to be the language that if you're speaking to an audience, and again, your audience, every marketer's audience is going to have a blend of all these people. My experience that you tend to attract some primary types of people that are wired that way. So that's the effectiveness. When you're getting them to decision, you want to use a lot of that language, a lot of that type of speak. Obviously your copy, you don't want it to be so long. You have an executive summary because they want to get to the bullet points quickly to make a decision. It's about speed of information, or it's about speed of making a decision about outcome and things of that nature. And that's that's extroverted thinking or effectiveness. Now, introverted thinking, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, one of the things that you can use to know if that's your audience is if you're targeting high level management and you're a B2B company, that's a pretty good indicator that the effectiveness filter might be pretty effective.
Yeah.
Or if the product in and of itself is an efficiency tool.
Yeah.
Designed to make people's life easier. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, did you mention HubSpot, Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah. So HubSpot's targeting a lot of marketing people, and there's probably two brands marketing. I'll get to the other one here, but there's kind of the bottom line, but there's also the creative kind of marketing people that are really into the whole, the glitz and glamour of the ad agency world of making things look polished and really creative and stuff. Right. So that's the other side of the coin. But so speaking to both of those energies is probably where a lot of marketers, like HubSpot, for example, if they're speaking to their marketing crowd, they could probably use a lot of that language to reach them. So that's effectiveness. If you look at introverted feeling, so that authenticity process, which again is about core values, inner alignment, the subjective human experience of someone, what are people going to feel when they hear this message? If you're marketing to those kind of people, you use words like resonant. Does that resonate with you? Does that feel right? Is that congruent? Does that meet the values that we're trying to do as a company or as a product or service? Does that take care of the individual and honor the individual human experience?
To speak to core values.
Yeah. So these are the languages and the words you would use. And what's interesting is, so that would be probably the other side of the coin for a lot of marketers. They tend to have that blend of that human subjective experience, and they can almost sense okay, this speaks to me emotionally. So if I create an ad or a marketing piece, this is probably going to speak to other people emotionally, right? So,
I'm a pepper.
Yeah.
That's my identity. Yeah. That's who I am. That's what resonates with me, even though everybody in the commercial has the same
T-shirt
I'm a pepper on. T-shirt on.
We're all individuals together.
That's right.
This idea of being an individual and standing up and speaking out and, kind of that idea, don't put me in a box, really, Jeff, right? Don't tell me that I'm one thing.
If you give me a pepper shirt, I'm going to burn it.
Don't tell me I'm just like everybody else. I am a unique individual that no one could understand the nuance of who I am on the inside. There's no way you can get into my world and understand all the different parts and everything that I experience, the good, the bad, the dark, the light.
It's multifaceted.
I'm multifaceted. And so language that speaks to that, this idea of being a very rich depth of a person.
You're different. You're unique.
Yes.
You're special.
Yeah, this speaks to I'm an authenticity person. That speaks to me like crazy. I'm like, yeah, that's right. I am individual and unique. There's nobody else like me, right? This is the way we feel about ourselves as authenticity people. So that's effectiveness. These are actual language that you can use in marketing, copy or video or audio or whatever. And then the other one is extroverted feeling. Remember harmony, right? So this is about getting people's needs met in the world. This is about creating great connections between humans in the world, about making sure everybody's getting along and having a great experience. And there's no need on the team going unmet, or no need going unmet in my world. So a lot of marketing I think it's like almost 50% of women use this process.
Over
right?
40%. Yeah.
Well, 40% of women use this process. So a lot of moms that are like raising small children are going to be using the harmony process. Not all, but there's a significant amount that marketers, if you watch marketing that targets mothers, tends to focus in on this process, this harmony process. Look, you're busy. You've had a long day, maybe at work, and your kids are now home from school. You got to make dinner, stovetop stuffing or whatever. That's an easy way to get everybody's needs met in your household, right? Everybody's going to be happy. It's a picture of everybody around the table eating and laughing and having a great time, and you got their needs met.
My favorite of that is the commercials who show the mom getting all the needs met, and then at the end she gets a coffee break herself.
Yeah.
And she's like sipping tea.
She gets her
you
needs
got
met.
your needs met too.
Yeah.
So all of this communication around not just everybody else's needs, but yours as well, and that's how you maintain harmony.
Yeah. So
The Calgon take me away.
That's right, exactly. At the end of the
absolutely.
day.
And there's even there was like a Swiffer commercial which was illustrating a man who used harmony recently, where it was like deep couch sitting or something, where he's like swiffering the floor with his son, and it was talking about getting the needs met of the household, and he was making sure things were clean and taken care of, and then he and his son got to connect and like
spend time together,
right? So this is something that he got to take care of the needs of the family. So it's not just women, but often marketing's targeted there because it's been traditionally how they've done it, and now marketing toward men is coming in too, because men are wired with harmony just as much as women are, or not just as much in percentage wise, but there's a lot of men using harmony as well. So that's the language you'd use, is getting needs met. What's the connection point? Having fun, connective family experiences, that kind of thing would speak to that harmony process a lot. And then, go ahead. You have questions?
I was going to ask, so based on what you've seen and how marketers use this, and Antonia, maybe like you can pick this up first. When you look at this political environment, and I'm not going to choose sides because it's so easy to do that, but we're not going to do that. I mean, how are politicians exploiting these personality types right now to kind of press everybody's buttons? You guys have kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier with the elections, but can you dive into that? Because I think that's a fascinating piece of content that people might wrap around.
Yes, let me finish the last piece just so it completes it, and then we'll jump right to that.
Right.
One
If
second.
that's what,
Just to finish this up. The last one is introverted thinking, what we've nicknamed accuracy. And these people in the audience are probably the toughest to market to out of all four of the decision-making processes, because they don't care about outcome as much. They really don't care about everybody getting along. And it's not really about what resonates or the internal, like real depths of experience. It's about the accuracy and reliability of the information. Does the information line up? Does this make sense in my head? Does this make sense for this thing to be the outcome? And often you'll see this kind of marketing in things that are tools or machines. So sometimes it could be like a GPS unit that they're trying to market, something that really, like, this will help you find the precise place on the lake to go fishing because it's precise and it's accurate and the metrics are there to get the tool you need to get the job done. Yeah. This kind of language in the accuracy process.
Yeah, precision, stats, being able to take things
high
apart.
Performance machines or high performance tools.
Alienware laptop does this really well.
Yeah.
Like they're very lots of data points and lots of letting you know what the specs are.
So I just want to give you all that so you have a framework of some tangible ways to think about when you know someone's decision-making process. You can know how to talk to them, how to speak to them well. So let's talk about, you take this one first. I don't want to touch political stuff, Jeff. They go.
I did this to her. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't think that Cambridge Analytica is using cognitive functions. I don't. I think that they're using other personality type models. And I think one of the things they're trying to get into is people's general motivations. I think the reason why right now identity politics is such a huge thing is most of these personality type systems are really trying to get into people's core motivations and how they see themselves and their identity. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons why, and this is more of I don't know, just kind of an impression I have of where we're at in the phase of time or in our timeline. But right now it feels like identity is very difficult for people to nail down, just in general, because we're in a very postmodern world where people don't have strong alignments with bigger institutions so much. Like religion is atrophying, or people's traditional relationship with religion is atrophying. Their traditional relationship with patriotism is atrophying. So we used to see ourselves as like sort of a cog in like a bigger machine, and we plugged ourselves in and we knew we were going to be taken care of, and that was who we were. And not everybody had the benefit of that. Of course, we did it on the backs of a bunch of people who didn't really get to find their place in that machine as much. And so in a postmodern world, we go, well, what if there is no machine, right? Then who are you if you can't just plug yourself in? And a lot of people are going, yeah, who am I? And in this sort of murky world of identity, there are bigger institutions that are seeing this, seeing sort of a vacuum created, scooping people up in order to identify with their machine. And it's done in a far less obvious way than maybe religion or patriotism or some other things are. And this would actually go to a completely different model other than Myers-Briggs. And we actually, on our podcast, we talk about multiple models. Some of them are easier in marketing than others. Like Myers-Briggs is an easier one to apply to marketing. But the answer to your question, actually, I would probably pivot over to another model called spiral dynamics, or the Graves model. And spiral dynamics is it's a vertical model, not a horizontal. So Myers-Briggs is horizontal, kind of assumes everybody's at the same level of development, but we're all different. A vertical model is one of development and growth, and it kind of shows where we're going in time. And this particular model, I think, really shows that we're in a time period of transition in general, and people are losing their normal identity. And when people have the ability to use personality type systems, they see that we're in kind of this tentative time, and they're able to use language, motivation, and the inability to have a solid identity, or a difficulty in having a solid identity, to scoop people up and go, I'll help you create an identity by making you a part of my movement. I'll help you create an identity by being a part of like my system. So it's almost like a convergence of two different models being to exploit a single challenge.
Yeah,
and that's what I would think going on.
Yeah, no, it reminds me of the, I mean, this has been said before and it's not a new thing, but historically speaking, the industrial era, what was happening in the 1920s and to some extent the 1930s, it's a similar loss of identity. The word you picked that you said that I picked right up on was postmodernism, and that complete confusion. Very interesting.
Yeah. And I think, I'm sorry. I was just going to say one little quick thing. If you have a strong identity based on some of these models, as in you can self-assign, you're a little more resistant to other people exploiting that blind spot. And so it's not even so much that the diagnostic is in a model like Myers-Briggs, but the prescription can to some extent be found there. As in, like, if you start to really rest into an understanding of how your own mind works, you feel a little less kicked around. And then you find a solid, kind of get your root chakra in there, and you kind of have a more solid position. And then now you're less easy to scoop up in some of these things that tell you that they'll help you create an identity for you. Thank you, Nicole. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. I just was hoping that, like, because we've talked about the Graves model many times, and it applies to where we are as a society, which I think is really relevant for marketers to understand, is where, like, we are in this massive transition right now in society, and it has implications for each of us as individuals, but it also has implications for us as a collective. And so can you just speak to a little bit about where we are in that model, and what kind of insights can we draw on that?
So this is a 3-hour podcast, right? I just want to make sure I'm that accurate.
We can do quick, like just do like a quick 3 minute. Can you do 3 minutes?
I can never do anything for
it's lightning round.
I'm a historical dynamic. Yeah, I'm an accuracy person, so I'm all about like the refinement of data, and I'm like, and just I get my little nerd glasses
data dumping.
On, and I data dump.
It's Antonia data dumping. We love it.
So my recommendation, if I could just like shamelessly plug our own podcast, is we actually at Personality Hacker Podcast, we have a couple different podcasts on spiral dynamics or the Graves model, which if you want to do a deeper dive, I recommend. And then there's some great resources out there. Anything by Don Beck, and there's some great content.
Christopher Cowan,
Don Beck, and some others on spiral dynamics. But basically, just as an encapsulation of where we're at right now, not to go through the entire model, we're in a time period right now where we're losing our relationship to being a part of a bigger institution. We're losing we had a bunch of institutions before that were ready-made for us. You're born into a religion, that's the religion you stay in. It was your pappy and your pappy's pappy religion, and that's where you're at.
Political party,
same deal. And so there was kind of these ready-made institutions for us to plug ourselves into. And we're going into a time period right now where we get to now use those institutions for our own purposes. And you can really see that right now. It feels like the political spectrum is very antagonistic towards big business. And one of the reasons is I think we instinctively know that big business is starting to take over our actual rulership. As in, like, it's the big businesses that are talking about things like making the infrastructure of our country better because they need it for their own business.
Mark Zuckerberg's talking about universal basic income.
Right.
Silicon Valley's leading the charge in that, not Washington. Right?
Yeah, healthcare, those kinds of things. Those kinds of conversations are more being tackled by big businesses than our governments. And our governments seem to not really be very good at figuring these bigger challenges out. And business seems to be better suited because that's what they've been doing for the last many decades, is that they have to problem solve on a big scale.
And make it sustainable, because you have to turn a profit in a business, right? You can't just do it without sustainability.
So we're moving into a time period where it seems like businesses are becoming more powerful than governments, and that's very unsettling to a lot of people, especially if everything goes meritocracy based. That feels like, well, what if I don't have merit? Where's my place in all of that? And so because on a macro scale, we're going from one way of thinking to another, we all have to go through these levels ourselves, and we all define out what our experience in the world is. We define it through the lens of our current growth state. And so where we're at on the levels is our relationship to these shifts. So there's something happening out there, and we have to try to determine whether that's good or bad and what's my place in it. And depending upon my level of development, I'm going to interpret it differently. I'm either going to determine it as good, bad, right in alignment with what my current goals are, maybe scary. We might define it as simply challenges to solve. Like, there's a lot of different ways to interpret it. And because people have a tendency, we are moving up into the next level, I believe, of we're kind of shifting into like another level of consciousness. And that means that everybody who's allowed themselves to sort of chill at certain levels and not really do any growth or go up the levels, they're now being forced up. And that's really unsettling to them. And in fact, it's causing a lot of personal angst. And so a part of the antagonism we see, I think, is that we're forcing people out of their comfort zones, and we're requiring all of us to see in bigger terms, because we now are officially facing challenges that we're not at a sophistication to solve the challenges we're facing. And the world is requiring us to best get to step in or destroy ourselves. And so now that can cause personal angst and personal antagonism. And we have bigger, more sophisticated thoughts coming down the line with mavens and people who are thinking at those levels. And then as they get disseminated down to whatever level an individual's at, they're going to interpret it differently than what it was intended to be. And so now we get somebody who maybe talked about the need to honor other cultures and not exploit them. And then it gets disseminated down to a person who now wants to create legislation around appropriation or something to that effect. When it was originally intended to be an honoring, now it's a law or rule. Because at this level, we want to turn everything into a law. But at this level, we want to turn it into a concept to solve a problem. So that's the other thing, is that we have very sophisticated thinking that's coming down the pipe to different levels that now have a different relationship with that idea.
They want to codify it.
Right. Or something to that effect, or it forces them to want to or encourages them to want to go to war over it, or encourages them to want to exploit it, depending on where we're at. So sort of understanding where we're at in the levels of development helps give clarity on why we have the relationship to the outer world that we do. And it kind of informs some of the political angst we're seeing. We're all stratified, we're all at different levels. And now we have to, and as opposed to before, we could just be in our small little towns and sort of ruminate on what's going on in our town. Now we're so globalized, and we have content or access to so much different information. Now these different levels are shoved in our face, and now we have to determine what we're going to do about that. So I know that that's really abstract, but it was also a very abstract question. So,
I think that's perfect. I think because the conversation we're having here on the Conscious Marketing Podcast and with the Conscious Marketing Institute is essentially exactly what you're talking about, is that as a society, each of us individually has this journey going on within ourselves. And the journey that's going on within ourselves is both interpreting the world internally as well as interpreting it externally. Mind you, we're also going through these massive shifts historically that also can be predicted, quite frankly, of what's coming at us and how it's going to happen. But we haven't done enough self-inquiry to really understand what's going on. And so we're being slapped upside the face with things that we don't know how to deal with. I mean, the government and politics is a prime example. Regardless of your political stance, we are becoming divided as a nation rather than feeling American, if you will. Like, you're seeing people choosing sides in ways that I've never seen politically. And so with all of this happening, it bears to question, how do I, like you said, how do I fit? Who am I? What are my values? What's really important to me? And how do I find those answers? Because we're not being taught that in schools. You can go through and you can get a PhD and still not understand how to self-inquire and how to figure out who you are, quite frankly. And I think that from a societal perspective, this is one of our biggest limitations right now, is that we haven't answered these questions. And so when you talk about people taking advantage or manipulating us, it's because we haven't done that self-work internally. And so from a consciousness perspective, and I look at it and I see people going through these awakening experiences, these major life events, these major life shifts, and they either fall apart in them and completely, you might call it a midlife crisis, but I'm seeing it happen in people's 20s. I'm seeing it happen in people's 60s. I'm seeing it happen all across the board where these major life shifts are happening. And most of it is an evolution of their consciousness. We start with the consciousness of looking at ourselves. Then we start to look outside of ourselves, and we start to look at ourselves as a piece of a system, usually a regional system. But now we have a lot of people in society who have evolved to starting to look at the world from a global conscious perspective, and how we are all connected, and how what we do as marketers and how what we do as individuals actually impacts the entire collective. And so it's just, I feel like this is a really exciting time to be alive, quite frankly, because I think we're watching something that historically will be reflected on for hundreds of years, of how our society went from a very individualized society into one that is more of a collective consciousness, as well as not losing that self-empowering piece. And so I just want to thank you guys for coming on, because for me, understanding mental tech, and I love that you call it mental technology, because many people would look at this and say that this is typing, or this is, putting people into a box, as Jeff mentioned. But really what we're talking about is understanding yourself, understanding those around you, and really understanding what your place is in the world and how to live and flow in harmony. And when we get to that place, I believe that we can unlock the full potential of humanity. And I just imagine a world where everyone is fully in line with their full potential, and what we could create as a society if we could stop the bickering and stop the divisiveness and start coming together and really going within, doing the work, and then looking outside. So one of the things I love about you guys is that's what you encourage. It's like, go within, do the work on yourself, and then look at how you can apply that out into the world, in your business and in your family. So thank you so much for being here. It was truly an honor. And honestly, I can see definitely having you guys back on to talk about some of these other models some more, because I can see people having a lot of questions about this and wanting to understand more about it. And I'll say this: if you don't know your Myers-Briggs type, and or if you do, I highly recommend going to personalityhacker.com. They have a 10-minute quiz that will give you the answer to that. And then they have tons of resources, from articles to podcasts to videos, that don't tell you, hey, this is you, this is what this, like, you are this prescription, but rather this is how your mind operates. And if you understand how your mind operates, then you can learn how to use it more effectively. So thank you so much. It's been an honor. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thanks,
for inviting
Nicole
us
and
on.
Jeff. Appreciate it, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you for joining the Conscious Marketing Podcast and taking a look in the mirror with us. We hope you found you learned something new about yourself and have another tool to help raise the bar of consciousness in our industry. If you liked what you heard, please take the time to give us a review. Every review matters and helps another marketer find their way here. Want to have next week's episode automatically queued up for your commute? Remember to subscribe before you leave. We thank you for your support. Please go to consciousmarketinginstitute.com for show notes, links, and other awesome resources. It is our honor to serve you. Now, let's go change the world. Music for the Conscious Marketing Podcast is provided by Sophia Fleming. Please check out her new album, Collection of Reflections. Just search for Sophia Fleming online.